I'm interested to know kind of how these Indian residential schools developed from your perspective, and where did things go wrong? And what are your perspectives on the religious element of this?
Yeah. Okay. Big questions, and really emotionally charged questions. People have been hurt by residential schools, physically, emotionally, sexually. These are just bad. Residential schools were bad. No Indigenous people asked for residential schools. Some Indigenous people did send their kids to residential school because they saw it as acquiring some necessary skills, Western-style skills that would be needed for the next generation. But nobody said, hey, set up a residential school, take our kids away, right? Nobody did that. Indigenous people were looking for Western-style education in a rapidly changing world. The ability to read and write English was an important skill to have to help protect your land, to help secure labor contracts, to help ensure, a whole bunch of things. So Indigenous people were anxious about that. A lot of Indigenous people heard the teachings of Christ and said, hey, wow, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor. These are some pretty cool teachings. We kind of can relate to this, right? Because we're kind of poor right now. Look what's happened to us, right? Love your enemy. Geez, we've been having conflicts with those Lekwaltak people up the coast for so long. We've been, there's been these raids back and forth, and they've been violent and harmful. If we could love our enemy and they could love us, maybe this would be right. So these are kind of interesting ideas that a lot of Indigenous people accept or embrace. They have their own traditions that they're still using and embracing too. They're looking for synergies. They're looking for things that say, oh, this is something that might provides amplitude to, amplifies an aspect of our culture and religion that we want to really emphasize now because we can see value in it, right? And we'll also hold on to our traditional teachings. So the residential schools, they're designed to take rights and title holders and turn them into an ethnic minority. That's what they're meant to do, and it's a sellout by the churches who are like, hey, we can get kids away from their parents and we can convert them to our philosophy, our theology, without the interference of their parents for multiple months of the year, and then we can feel good that we've saved these souls. They're now converts to our faith, and we get money from it, right? We get paid tuition. We can encourage more young men and women to go into the priesthood and into the convent, and if you're Protestant, become reverends and ministers. It's a corrupt. It was a corrupt thing, and who does it attract into those schools? Who's the young non-Indigenous man who in 100 years ago, 50 years ago says, I want to devote my life to a career where I'm working at low wages at a remote school with a whole bunch of young children where these children don't have any parental oversight. So maybe that's attracting some people who are just kind, benevolent people. Let's just say maybe, right? I can imagine some other people who are being attracted to that, right? And that's not pretty, right? If you're a pedophile, if you're like, and pedophiles, from my understanding, and I'm not a psychologist, but talking to psychologists, these people who have these warped sexualities will do long-term detailed planning to get access to little kids, right? It's not just, circumstance. Maybe they do that too, but these are creeps, right? Who do long-term planning. So yeah, if that's your inclination, if you really want to sexually abuse children, where better than to set yourself up and get a job at a residential school, right?
Right.
And that makes my stomach turn, right? And I'm not saying that every priest, every nun, every minister was a pedophile, but if you were a pedophile, that would be some place that you would be attracted to in terms of a place where you could get access to kids without their parents being around to protect them. Yeah.
Yeah, that is one of the darkest parts, I think, of this conversation and of Indigenous people's history is the sense of vulnerability. And I find it really interesting to see the disconnect between Canadian culture and Indigenous communities, because if you watch even like a movie or you read the book, The Indian Horse, you see the first 20 minutes of the movie is families trying to get their children up north away from danger. and protect them the best they can. And so when I hear people today go, I had no idea it was this bad, that there were children passing away, it's like, that's really unfortunate to hear, because this was taking place not just over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. This happened over like 100-year span of these abuses beginning and taking place, and Indigenous people knowing that this is not the place for my kid to be. This is not a safe, peaceful, high quality education. Like, not many people were thinking that.
No.
And so having that disconnect, I think, really strongly reflects the cultural differences that take place on reserve versus off reserve. I still see those today, that there are certain etiquettes that are allowed on reserve that don't fly in our court system. As a Native court worker, I had the opportunity to kind of see those differences. Sure.